Hello and welcome to the Socialist World podcast from the Committee for Workers International, putting forward a Marxist analysis and revolutionary socialist program to arm the struggle against capitalism.
Hello, welcome to Socialist World, the podcast. I'm joined today by Hannah Sell. Hannah is a member of the International Secretariat of the CWI, but she's also the General Secretary of the Socialist Party, which is the England and Wales section of the CWI. So for our topic today, Hannah's perfectly positioned to discuss your party, the developments that have taken place in Britain in the recent period, the beginnings of the emergence of a new left party. But in the course of the discussion, I'm sure, Hannah, you will give us a more precise definition.
Perhaps, yeah. Thanks, Sean.
So I've been thinking where we should chew this subject from to start with. And I guess we'd better start with the broader background to your party. So why has it emerged at this stage?
Well, I would say there's been the potential for this kind of party for a long time in Britain. And there's been a few other missed opportunities. I mean, Britain is not fundamentally different to lots of other countries. I'm sure listeners in other countries will recognise a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about. But I suppose the particular crisis of British capitalism, if you look at the growth in output per head since the Great Recession 15 years ago, it's virtually non-existent. The British economy has just stagnated. And there has been relentless austerity imposed by the previous Tory government, an enormous kind of anger against that and a fall in support for that government. Historically, the Tory party were probably the most successful capitalist party on the planet. Back in the 1950s, they had 2 million members. They were in government over a long time in Britain from 2010, but with falling support. So a lot of anger against them, a lot of anger about austerity. There was a big strike wave immediately after the pandemic. Again, that was similar in other countries. And at that time, actually, there was a potential new party because some of the leaders of that strike wave announced this new thing called Enough is Enough.
What year was that?
That was in 2022. And 500,000 people signed up to that. But then they just directed it towards pressurising the Labour Party.
Mm-hmm. And this was before the Labour Party came into government.
And that was before the Labour Party won the general election. And then the Labour Party did win the general election. And that was told but to us in Britain and seen internationally as this huge victory because it was a landslide in terms of the size of the majority that Labour now has in the Parliament. But actually, their vote was lower than under the previous two general elections when they'd had a more left-wing leader, Jeremy Corbyn, someone who's involved in this new party.
And the ruling class doesn't like to mention that very often.
They never mention it. On the night of the election, they were all talking about how Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, had transformed Labour and transformed its fortunes, and nothing about how low the actual vote was. And yet, it was the lowest vote for lowest share of the vote for an incoming government since the introduction of universal suffrage. It was universal male suffrage, actually. It was an incredibly low vote. So a very shallow victory. And then Tories are falling apart, got their lowest vote in their entire history in hundreds of years. Labour are in office and Labour continue with the same policies. Nothing has changed. So, of course, you then get enormous anger against the Labour government. And those two parties that are the kind of traditional governing parties in Britain have now only got a third of the electorate combined say they're prepared to vote for them. So there's this massive vacuum. Reform, who are the right populists.
Oh, yes, you mentioned that the similar process as in other countries. And of course, we've seen this polarisation in France, Germany.
Yes.
The emergence of new left forces, but on the other side of the spectrum, the emergence of right populist forces. So that's a factor in Britain as well.
Absolutely it is. Reform is like the latest version of Nigel Farage's political parties. He's the figure who's led different political parties. And they've been getting a few million votes in different elections for quite a long time, actually. It fell the most, the vote for UKIP, his old party, in 2017, when Jeremy Corbyn, the left Labour leaders, led Labour to a big increase in votes, and that took 1 million votes from UKIP. But they've been getting a few million votes, but that hasn't previously resulted in electoral breakthroughs, partly because of Britain's electoral system being first past the post.
Okay.
But in this general election, they did manage to get a handful of MPs elected. And since the general election, with the huge anger at the Tories and Labour, they have been picked up by a lot of people, sections of the working class, as a kind of weapon to beat the establishment with. So they're ahead in the polls now, and they are whipping up anti-migrant policies, as are the Labour government and as did the previous Tory government. So they're kind of amplifying something that all the establishment parties have also been doing, very divisive politics.
And this is the playbook that we've seen across Europe as well, America as well, with Trump.
Absolutely,
whipping up the anti-migrant idea as a deflection of the anger that exists in society. Now, you mentioned a name just now.
Yes.
Jeremy Corbyn. I think we can't go any further without explaining to our listeners who Jeremy Corbyn is, because he's at the centre of this Your Party project.
Yeah.
So who is Jeremy Corbyn?
Okay. I mean, if you don't know who Jeremy Corbyn is, it's a slightly complicated story, but to try and summarise it briefly, for a very long time, under the years when Tony Blair was Labour Prime Minister, and we would say Labour had really become an out-and-out capitalist party, he remained a Labour backbencher. Back then, there were allowed a few Labour MPs to remain who were on the left, because they had no power in the party, and Jeremy Corbyn was one of those. Then, in 2015, actually in an attempt to even further make Labour a out-and-out capitalist party, there was a move to change Labour's constitution so that it had something a bit more akin to a kind of US primary system built into it.
Okay.
So basically you could vote for the leader while you weren't a member of the party, which had never been the case previously, and they were under the illusion that that would further undermine the remnants of trade union power in Labour. That trade union power had already been broken largely, but it was still, remnants of it were still there. But it was a mistake by the right of the Labour Party, because what actually happened is, in the aftermath of the Tories having just won a general election, no industrial fight back being offered by the trade union leaders, people were told, you can pay £3, the price of a pint of beer, and you can vote for this socialist to be leader of the Labour Party, and they did. So kind of out of nowhere, Jeremy Corbyn, this left figure, became the leader of the Labour Party, which had a predominantly capitalist right-wing parliamentary Labour Party machine and so on. So then a battle ensued. You probably don't want me to answer this right now, but the question of why he lost that battle is something maybe we should discuss, and what lessons have and haven't been learnt. But he did lose that battle. And after the 2019 election, he stood down with, it was the idea Labour had gone down to its worst defeat in history, even though in 2019 they did get a lower vote than they'd had previously in 2017, but it was still higher than Keir Starmer won the general election with in 2024. But on that idea, Corbyn fell on his sword, he resigned, and Starmer, a agent of the capitalist class, grasped the Labour Party again, and then set out to prove how safe this party was for capitalism, because Corbynism frightened them. It didn't frighten them because of Jeremy Corbyn. He is notoriously a mild-mannered individual.
How polite.
Extremely polite, yes. It wasn't him that the capitalists were frightened of, but it was the enthusiasm for his policies. His anti-austerity programme got a huge echo. A whole generation, a little bit like Bernie Sanders in the US, had the idea we're socialists because of what Jeremy Corbyn stood for. In the 2017 election, Labour went from miles behind to almost winning. If the campaign had gone on another couple of weeks, they probably would have won. And on election day, there were young people on the university campuses queuing around the block in order to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. So we had this huge enthusiasm effect. They were terrified by that. Once they got the Labour Party back, then they kicked out, it was like smashing the embers. They drove out anybody remotely on the left, including Corbyn himself, been kicked out of the Labour Party and not allowed to stand as a Labour MP in the general election.
Mm-hmm.
He then stood as an independent, and then you get into the story that we're going to be discussing today.
Okay. So Corbyn's been out of the Labour Party leadership for 6 years.
Yep.
But now we have steps towards a new party.
Yes.
So where do we pick up the thread? Where does the story start with this development?
Okay. I mean, the first thing is, obviously, we think he should have acted long ago. This was much too late. And there could have been a clear block of socialist MPs elected from a new party in this last general election. And that didn't happen. But as well as Jeremy Corbyn, there were 4 other independent MPs elected in this last general election.
Okay.
And that was as a result primarily of the Gaza movement.
Of course.
Huge anger, as in, so many countries around the world, against the horror in Gaza and the government support for it and the opposition support for it. Starmer has been a loyal defender of the Israeli capitalist class, of whatever US imperialism thinks and so on, and people are furious about that.
And Britain's had a larger anti-war movement than many countries.
It has, yes. And that, I think, does have to do with the positive legacy of Jeremy Corbyn as well, is one element in that. And there's been big sections of the working class and young people in particular who've taken part in the massive protests and so on. But it's probably also true in the general election, it was seats where there were large numbers of workers from a Muslim background, where independents were elected, or in many other seats got big votes. So it was like that section of the working class, were ahead of the rest of the working class at that point in time, because they were voting consciously against Labour and for candidates that were anti-war, left and so on. So then you got this block of 5 independent MPs who are now called the Independent Alliance.
Right.
So that was the basis for the formation of a new party, a potential workers' bloc in Parliament. In addition to that, there were a number of Labour MPs who had their whip removed, so they weren't allowed to sit as Labour MPs, that's what that means, for doing things like voting against the government keeping the 2-child benefit cap. The 2-child benefit cap is, if you are a family that are claiming benefits, welfare benefits, whether you're in work or not, if you have more than 2 children, you can't get any money for the 3rd, 4th, 5th child. So it's led to almost 1 million more children being in poverty. It's a horrific policy. The Labour government voted to keep it when they first came in. The MPs that dared to break the whip were then kicked out of the Parliamentary Labour Party.
An early lesson to anyone that was going to resist Starmer's policies.
Exactly, yeah. And one of those, Zara Sultana, she then resigned from Labour rather than keep begging to get the whip back. And so she also became part of this independent alliance group of MPs.
And she's the other key figure in this whole process.
She is, absolutely.
Her name's getting more known.
Yes.
Even internationally, possibly.
To some extent, I think, yeah. She wasn't leader of the Labour Party. She's not as well known as Jeremy Corbyn, but she has got more of a profile now. And we've been campaigning that there should be moves towards a new party, that the trade unions in particular had a crucial role to play in that. And by the way, things were happening there even before the announcement of a new party.
In the trade unions?
In the trade unions. So, for example, the Birmingham bin workers, that's the British term for refuse workers, Birmingham's the second city in Britain, they've been on strike now for almost a year. They've been out for a long time against a Labour council cutting their pay by up to £8,000 a year. Huge anger at that. The Labour council then moved to fire and rehire them, which is one of the few things the Labour government had actually promised to get rid of when they got elected. And at the Unite conference, which is one of the biggest unions in Britain this year, a conference representing over 1 million workers, they voted almost unanimously for a motion that we had moved, that the union had to reassess its relationship with Labour, because it's affiliated to the Labour Party, if the fire and rehire of the Birmingham bin workers went ahead, and it has gone ahead. They're heroically striking on. They've managed to get agency workers out on strike who had been brought into scab, and they've got that out on strike with them. Great achievement, yeah. But they've been fired and rehired. So those debates were bubbling up in the unions. And we were campaigning around those issues. So a member of ours, Dave Nellist, the chair of the Trade Unionists and Socialist Coalition, he called a meeting of trade unionists in the summer to discuss the campaign in the trade unions to fight for a new workers' party. And Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana came to that meeting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So we're acting as a lever, the CWI in Britain.
Absolutely. There is no question that they were hesitating. I wanted to say faffing around, but that's a bit of a rude way of putting it.
Listeners can Google translate that.
Yes. But anyway, they hadn't got there, and our meeting was a factor in putting pressure on. And then there was an announcement of a new party. That was a bit complicated.
Okay, in what way?
Zara Sultana announced first. There was a bit of a gap while Jeremy Corbyn was obviously a bit annoyed that she'd announced without him. And then they did a joint announcement.
Okay.
But that joint announcement, 800,000 people signed up to it. So that shows the potential for a new workers' party in Britain. But it has got more complicated since then.
Okay. I feel this could be a long story as well.
Yeah.
So when was that announcement made?
The initial announcement was made back in July.
In July, and we're now in December.
We are.
So what's happened over the last few months?
So we had the founding conference of your party at the end of November, last weekend in November.
Okay, yeah.
And in person, I think there were a couple of thousand people at that conference. And then there were more people who could vote online. But I think a maximum of about 10,000 people voted in total when the whole membership could vote.
Okay.
And that's a bit of an indication
what's the gap
of
between
the size compared to what it could be. Yeah.
You said 800,000 signed up initially.
Yes, that's right. Really, what happened is, in our view, a wrong approach in that there was an attempt to kind of keep control at the top. And that is something that was done by the people who were organising, supposedly in defence of Corbyn inside the Labour Party, a grouping called Momentum.
Okay.
It was very top down, and really this was a similar approach that was taken. And that meant there was no room to set up official local branches. No membership data was sent out to people locally. It was all controlled at the top. And then there were open divisions between Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, and a kind of row taking place in the press. And of course, the press are no friends of a potential new party, so they maximise that. So a sense that this is divided, it's not going anywhere, and that has definitely deflated the balloon a bit in how people see your party, where we are at the moment.
Okay. But there's still sufficient momentum, obviously, for the founding conference to have taken place. So the game's not over.
No, it's not.
So what happened at the conference, and what conclusions are we drawing from that?
I mean, there were some good things at the conference. So, for example, there was a motion up that offered either the option of dual membership being allowed, i.e. you could be a member of the Socialist Party and your party, or other left groups and your party.
Okay.
And there was another motion for for dual membership not being allowed. And the motion for dual membership passed overwhelmingly. About 2/3 voted in favour of that.
And why do we think that's an important policy?
It's an important policy because you're not going to build a new party on the basis of everybody's got to agree about everything. Even if there weren't existing socialist and Marxist organisations, not least ourselves, who want to help build your party, it's inevitable as you get a party off the ground, there are going to be people with different ideas about how to fight for socialism. And you have to have democracy, freedom to organise around different ideas and so on. So from that point of view, that was quite
makes
important.
Makes sense. The differences from different organisations are openly put rather than people, I don't know, pretending they're not members of another organisation.
Exactly, yes. So that was a good thing. And the other thing is, members of ours have pushed an amendment which called for local Your Party groupings to organise people's budget conferences.
Okay.
Because we've got a big set of local and also Wales and Scotland elections coming up next year. And the idea of a people's budget conference is that you bring together in a local area all the different trade unions, community campaigns, service users, and say, what cuts have you suffered? What do you think your local authority, your council should be fighting for? And you draw up a no-cuts budget, saying you're not going to implement any more government-driven austerity, which is what every council has done around the country over the last 15 years.
Yep.
You're going to refuse to implement any more cuts, and you're going to fight for this programme in the interests of the local community agreed by a People's Budget Conference. So that idea, we got onto the agenda, and it was up twice, actually, because of the way the conference worked, but once 90% of people voted for it and once 80-odd%. So there was a lot of agreement with that idea.
90%.
Yeah.
That shows people want to fight on concrete issues.
It does, yeah. So those things were very positive. But that is not to say that the conference was positive overall. There were negatives as well, in our view.
Okay.
One of those, I think you've kind of got to go back a bit, because there isn't actually a party yet, really. In our view, instead of this very top-down controlling approach, everything should have been openly discussed from the beginning. It would have been much better to get together all those trade union organisations who want a new party, and as I said, that debate is taking place in the trade union movement. So even if not national trade unions at this point, there would have been lots of left organisations in the trade unions, regions, local branches. Get all them together, get all the existing socialist organisations together, get the genuine groups of local councillors who are kind of anti-cuts that exist in different places around the country, together with the Independent Alliance MPs, and say, let's get this show on the road and involve everybody openly in the organising. And on that basis, you could have got local branches up and running that could have recruited far more of that 800,000, because they'd be turning out and campaigning on the issues that matter to working class people, but also then to have a conscious turn to the trade unions. Because we don't just want a left party, we're Marxists. We think that society is driven by class struggle. And what we've got in Britain, like most other countries around the world, are workers having a choice between voting for different capitalist parties. And you need a party that represents our class. So you want a workers' party, not just a left party. And in Britain, there is a particular tradition that originally the Labour Party was built as a workers' party by the trade union movement. It didn't happen in exactly the same way in other countries, I know, but that's the British tradition, that the Labour Party was raised by the working class via the trade unions. So the idea that the trade unions need to build a new party and stop funding Labour, that's an issue of debate already in the workers' movement in Britain, and you've got to fight for it. And if Jeremy Corbyn had used his authority and gone primarily to the base of the trade union movement and said, we want you to be involved in this new party, we'd like you to stop funding Labour and to affiliate to at this new party, and you will have a say in it democratically. If you do, it will be a voice for your members. By now, you could have had a conference which certainly would have had a number of different regional trade union organisations, but quite possibly would already have at least smaller unions nationally affiliating. And
presumably the ground was fertile. You mentioned the strike wave earlier.
Absolutely, the ground is fertile. There's enormous anger against this Labour government. And the right-wing trade union leaders, to some extent at this stage, all of the trade union leaders, are holding back struggle a bit because it's against a Labour government. And that anger is building up. People are really furious. And they're also saying, we need somebody to vote for. And a lot of trade unions are saying, if we don't have anyone to vote for, workers are going to go and vote for reform. We've got to build an alternative. This is urgent. So that debate's taking place anyway, but Jeremy Corbyn could have put a fire under it if he'd orientated towards the trade unions.
So that begs the question, why do we think Corbyn didn't do that?
I mean, that is a very good question.
And I know there's limits to psychoanalyzing Jeremy Corbyn, but his political background, is there a clue in there?
I think there is to some extent. I mean, look, it is. I don't want to get into psychoanalyzing. The fact is, he hasn't done it, and he should have done it. And he has a long record of supporting workers in struggle. I mean, he really does. You know, if you're a socialist activist in London, you meet him on picket lines because he goes round the picket lines and supports them and so on. So it's not that he's not supported strikes, but the idea that you're building a party of the working class rather than you're there to do good from above, I do not think he understands, which is reflected, if you like, to his reformist outlook. And the way this party has been built so far is unfortunately modelled And I cannot possibly judge to what degree this comes from Jeremy Corbyn or other figures. We're not in those closed meetings. But the fact is, this is how it's been built. It's been built on the basis of the membership are like this passive mass and can vote online on different issues.
Okay,
even that conference, it wasn't a delegate conference. You could be, it's called sortitioned, and I'd never heard of it before.
No, and I suspect most of our listeners haven't heard of it either. What's this?
It's basically, you put your name in the hat and you could be selected by lottery to go to the conference. So, which, by the way, is not a democratic way of doing things, because then you're not only not representing somebody, you've got to fund yourself. Not everybody can do that. If you're coming from a branch, the branch funds you to go. But also every member could vote online. Now, keeping the party like that was voted for at the conference. People supported that kind of idea, yes. But in our view, it's not the most democratic way of doing things. You need representative democracy. And what actually happens, which was shown at the conference, is the people who set the questions are really having an enormous amount of control over events. And then people are sitting at home and voting based on a limited number of questions and a limited number of options. And so it's not the same as getting delegates together to discuss and debate different issues. And that dual membership issue is one example of that, because people voted for the only form of dual membership that was on the table. But actually that still left it to the new Central Executive Committee that hasn't been elected yet to decide who can and can't have this dual membership. There was no other option.
And not to mention that people sitting at home, they might not have heard other sides of the debate on certain questions. There's no indication for their own background, what experience they've got in the movement, the opportunity to share their experience, but get experience from others who've been in struggles and so on. So,
if any trade unionists, think about it in the workplace, would you be in favour of selecting by lottery who went and negotiated with the bosses on your behalf? No, you wouldn't. You want to elect them and hold them to account.
Yeah, and put forward those best able to put forward the interests of the... Yes, when you put it like that, I think that makes an enormous amount of sense. So as it stands now then, what is the relationship, if any, between the Your Party process and the trade unions?
Right now there's no relationship, unfortunately. The conference did agree to look at the next 12 months over the question of affiliation, both for different kinds of organisations, and we'd argue that includes socialist organisations, but definitely including trade unions. And they also passed a motion, which we voted for because it was the only thing related to trade unions on offer, but was to set up some kind of commission to talk to trade union leaders. It wasn't the kind of campaign aimed at the base of the unions that we think is needed. But there's nothing else at this point in time. And unfortunately, many of those who are active in Your Party and other left forces at this stage, they do not agree with us on this question of the trade unions. Sultana, who generally has been somebody who has talked more about socialism than other leading figures in Your Party. What she means by that is not entirely clear, but nonetheless, she talks about it more, which is welcome. And she's defended dual membership and so on. But she talks about the working class should run society, but she's opposed to the trade unions, the working class playing any role in Your Party.
That's interesting, but where does that come from then?
It comes from the fear of right-wing trade union leaders acting as an obstacle in Your Party.
And you've mentioned the need to focus efforts on the base of the trade unions. So that distinction between the leadership and the base is not...
It's not, I think that they don't see that there's a battle taking place in the unions and we have to assist that battle. Partly it comes from that in the past, what was called the block vote in the Labour Party was the trade union vote was sometimes undemocratically wielded by right-wing general secretaries to back the right wing in the trade union, in the Labour Party. And people have a fear of that. And look, we get that. We're not arguing about right-wing trade union leaders. There's no question.
They're there.
And they dominate. It's a more complicated story than they realise with the Labour Party, though, because historically, Labour was what we'd call a capitalist workers' party.
Okay.
So it had a leadership that ultimately always defended the interests of the capitalist class in power, but it had a working class base that could exert pressure on the party via the trade unions primarily, and the trade unions' affiliation to the Labour Party. And that meant it was a less reliable tool for the capitalist class. You don't want loads of history, but you go back
We can have a little bit.
You can have a little bit. Go back to 1931, the second Labour government, under huge pressure to implement austerity. The cabinet narrowly voted for it. I mean, massive austerity. This is in the wake of the 29 crash. Cabinet narrowly voted for it. The right-wing leader of the biggest trade union at that time, the Transport and General, went to them and said, the TUC, the trade unions, cannot accept it. You cannot do this. They could not do it. The capitalist class had to split the Labour Party and form a national government with National Labour, while the majority of the Labour Party stayed with the Labour Party and that trade union base. So historically, they're seeing it one-sided. They don't see the class weight and the importance of that, but they're also seeing it through the prism of the post-war upswing, because that period from the 50s to the 70s, right-wing trade union leaders could often back right-wing motions and get a certain stability in the Labour Party because Labour governments were implementing reforms, because capitalism was giving a bit. That period is long gone. It's not where we are now.
Right-wing's a bit relative for a different period.
Exactly, yes. And today, of course, the trade union leaders do not want to affiliate to a new party. They're either arguing to just keep the link with Labour, or, because many of the unions are not affiliated at the moment, they're arguing unions should just be independent, they should stay out of politics.
Right.
And what really lies behind that is they can't envisage the working class taking power. They think their job is just to put a bit of pressure on the bosses. They can't imagine going beyond that, and the idea terrifies them. But in the unions, it's from the ranks, not from the leaders, who are saying we need a political voice and are fighting on those issues. And if those members forced, against their will, the leaders of a right-wing union to be involved in the supporting or setting up of a new workers' party, that would be a huge step forward and would be pressure on those members, those union leaders, to fight for an anti-austerity platform and a platform in workers' interests. And that battle would be on. So they're seeing it in an abstract way when they oppose it. They're not understanding the class struggle would actually take place. Of course, that doesn't mean that we want the same structure as the old Labour Party had.
Okay.
And we would argue strongly for any trade union representation in the new party. It's vital to have it, but that should be under the democratic control of members and so on. But when those members have just fought to back a new party or to affiliate to a new party, there's going to be a much greater opportunity to get that than in other circumstances.
In fact, from what you've explained of our analysis there, adopting the approach that we're putting forward would actually make the greatest steps to pushing aside those right-wing.
Absolutely. It's part of the struggle to transform the unions. It's not separate.
Yeah. If we just take one step back quickly. Now, you explained earlier about the faffing
Yes.
of Jeremy Corbyn and those around him in taking the steps to launch your party. Now, I understand that that's given some space for the Green Party in Britain to emerge as a left pole. Would we say that? What's the situation there?
Yes, it's interesting. Back in the summer, when there were 800,000 people saying they wanted to join your party, and there was a big opportunity to create a new workers' party, we were saying, if this party's founded with a clear socialist programme like we would want it to be, then the Greens should be invited to affiliate. And we were raising that because even then, there were young people who joined the Greens looking for a socialist alternative. There's other elements in the Greens as well, as I'll go on to explain. But actually posing that question probably would have split the Greens in reality, but could have brought the best of the Greens into a broader party. And we think a party should be organised on a federal basis, so they could keep a Green identity if they wanted,
they could have their dual membership.
Exactly, yes. But it's a bit of a different situation now, because the total membership, it might have gone up since I last saw, but the total membership last I saw of your party is 55,000, whereas the Greens have put on, I think it's now approaching 100,000 members. They've grown. So most of that 800,000 have gone nowhere, but a big chunk of them have joined the Greens. And that is because at the same time as there was paralysis at the top of your party, then the Greens elected a new leader, this guy called Zach Polanski, who talks left, and it's quite he's quite a good public media kind of spokesperson talks about taxing the rich and so on, and, by the way, is getting shed loads of media coverage. And I would just say, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it still shows the capitalist class would see the Greens as a safer vehicle than your party having success. So all the coverage of your party is about the division at the tops, and all the coverage of the Greens is letting Polanski talk on national media and so on. But they've picked people up. They have picked people up. At the same time, when you actually look into it, there are 41 councils in Britain where the Greens are already part of the administration. And that includes alliances with every party apart from Reform. Includes alliances with the Tories, the traditional party of British capitalism, as well as Labour. And all of those councils are implementing austerity. So there is the Greens they've recruited a lot of young people because that Polanski's talking left. But they still, when they've been in power, fundamentally, in my view, because they accept the constraints of the capitalist system, have not used their positions to mobilise the working class to fight. They've implemented austerity.
But it's a version of this distinction between a left party and a workers' party.
It is,
They've
absolutely.
got no conception of class struggle.
Yeah.
And of course, in other countries, we've seen a similar thing with the Greens. They've gone into coalition with the whole spectrum of capitalist parties, sometimes up to the level of national government, for example, in Germany.
Yeah, and in Scotland, which is not, so far from us in England and Wales. Not yet in England and Wales, though, so they're still seen as a bit of a left alternative. And look, young people who've joined them, we understand that completely, but we would just raise with them, what programme is the Greens actually standing on? If Zach Polanski comes out and says next May, I will not be in favour of anyone standing as a Green candidate unless they're prepared to refuse to implement any more austerity, that would be fantastic. And then you could be in a position of having a joint campaign, effectively, between your party candidates, other socialists and the Greens. But when he's been asked by socialists so far, he said, no, there's nothing you can do. You've got no choice but to implement austerity.
Okay, very interesting. Well, I think this point on the Greens probably brings us towards the end of this discussion.
I think so.
But what it makes me think is there's a mood in society that is desperately trying to find an outlet. When there's hesitations and delays, it goes in different directions. We've explained mostly on your party, but we've just shown how the mood can find expression through the Greens. So maybe we could close by just taking a small step back, and we would describe this as the broader struggle for working class political representation. It's open what role your party will play. We've been very involved in the immediate struggles around the conference and so on. We've got the May elections coming up in Britain next year that you've mentioned. British capitalism is in a blind alley. So how do we see the process, the struggle, the broader struggle for working class political representation unfolding, let's say, in the next period?
Yes, let's say in the next period. Because it's going to be complicated. It was always going to be complicated. We're involved in your party, and we're going to fight for your party to take steps towards being the kind of workers' party with a socialist programme that is needed. But as you say, its future is open, and it could end up being part of the process towards the formation of a workers' party, but not the whole story. You've got that historically in Britain in the sense that there was something called the Independent Labour Party that became part of the process towards the foundation of the Labour Party, but only one part, along with other forces as well. So let's see how it develops. But even if your party was to disappear from the scene altogether, which is obviously not what we want, the process isn't going to end because British capitalism is in a terrible crisis now. A new world recession is clearly ahead, and British capitalism is only going to suffer worse from that. And the working class has begun to enter struggle. That strike wave back in 2022-23, that was the biggest strike wave since the 1980s. The working class is starting to find its voice and to fight back. And strikes have not gone back, by the way, to the strike wave level. They're still at a higher level, and that's not changed under a Labour government, despite the best efforts of the right-wing trade union leaders. And the capitalist class have got a crisis of political representation. The Labour government could fall apart in office who knows what they're going to do. Can't rule out them trying to move to a new electoral system, to PR, to try and find a means to govern, moving to some sort of national government like they had to do in 31. Mm-hmm. All kinds of things are possible, but the working class is going to continue looking for a political outlet, like they did with Corbyn when they saw a chance to make him leader of the Labour Party. So even though it's complicated, we're at the beginning of a process. And I would also add that the strength of the Socialist Party in arguing throughout the trade union movement for conscious steps in this direction is a factor in this event. We can help speed things up. Of course, that's not to say that building a workers' party is the end of the story, because it really isn't. For us, the reason we raise the idea is because we think we need socialism, and the class that can overthrow capitalism and build a new socialist order is the working class, because of our collective role in production, in running society. We're the people who can transform it. So founding your own political party as a class is a step towards taking the power. And so always for us, it's never just about talking about the need for a workers' party, but also what programme it stands on. And after all, subject of a different podcast, but there have already been examples of left governments, like happened in Syriza 10 years ago in Greece, that were elected on a surge of working class anger against austerity and then bowed the knee to the capitalist class once they were in office. We need a party that is capable of doing the opposite, of mobilising the power of the working class to remove the levers of power from the capitalist class and build a new society. So the two things are linked, obviously, in our view.
A genuine and clear alternative, a socialist alternative and a revolutionary alternative.
Exactly.
And I think that's the perfect note to leave the discussion
for today. Yes.
And the struggle for working class political representation in Britain will continue, as it will in other countries around the world. We'll cover developments in other countries in future podcasts, and I'm sure, Hannah, we'll come back to developments in Britain in future discussions as well.
Certainly. Yes, nice to talk to you.
Thank you. You too.
The Committee for a Workers' International is organized on every continent. If you would like to join us and get active, building the CWI in your part of the world, please visit our website at socialistworld.net. Here you can also subscribe to our weekly email newsletter and support our work by making a donation. If you have any question or comment about the podcast, please let us know and we may try and respond in future episodes.